But if you hire a Kellen Moore or a Joe Brady or a Ben Johnson or a Cliff Kingsbury, those guys are calling the offense, you know? What about this name? What about Brian Schottenheimer? Schottenheimer. Schottenheimer.
All right, there it is. Got some big Cowboys news. Brian Schottenheimer named head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. We anticipated it. We talked about it earlier in the week, but it's officially happened. I'm Kent, filling in for KT, who's out of town at probably the worst time to be out of town. He's usually never out of town, but the worst time to be out of town. Shout out to KT. Have fun in Las Vegas. We'll take it from here. I'm joined by Saad, Yousuf, John Machota of The Athletic. They got articles out right now. The internet's ablaze. And let me just say, before I pass it to you, John, for some reaction, as a man who's a fan of internet and the X.com, the everything app, the last 12 hours have been, I don't know where they come up with this stuff, but it's just been wow over the past 12 hours, just the chatter out there. What was your reaction when you heard that this was finally going down for real?
I mean, it's not a surprise. Obviously, we had talked about it, and it seemed like things were heading in this direction. It just, when you talk about the internet and memes and things like that, like, I don't know, it really didn't register very much for me from that perspective, because I just don't think this is very exciting. So I just don't see a lot of, people really that worked up about it one way or the other. I just think that it leads to kind of apathy, where if Brian Schottenheimer ends up being a great head coach and this is a great hire, there'll be plenty of time down the road where people will give it high praise and talk about how unexpected this was. But as we sit here today and coming off the season they just had, knowing that they're probably not going to be a very big player in free agency, just like they haven't been for the past decade, there's just not a lot there where if you're a fan of the team that it gets you real excited. But in terms of making this move, it just, from who they interviewed and the fact that this is the only candidate that had a second interview, it just seemed like it was heading in this direction. So not a surprise, but I don't get the sense that the fan base is very fired up about it.
Yeah, and I thought a lot of this happened fairly quickly in terms of Schottenheimer's interviews that all happened this past week, and John actually threw out the possibility of Schottenheimer before the interviews even lined up on this podcast last week. So I think that the internet reaction and everything, honestly, it kind of sucks a little bit, to be honest, because Schottenheimer is a good dude, and I think much of the ire that the fan base has, I think he's catching strays, but I think a lot of it is directed towards Jerry and the process, which is exactly where it should be directed, because when this process started, forget after the McCarthy stuff went down, it looked like they were going to cast a wider net this time in the coaching process, because last time it was McCarthy, Marvin Lewis, and maybe Jeff Fisher or something like that. It wasn't a very wide net, and it looked like it was heading in a direction where they might get a little deeper, where they had these interviews with Leslie Frazier and Robert Saleh set up, but a lot of the other guys were still playing games in the playoffs, so maybe they'll interview Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn or Kellen Moore, things like that. It looked like it was heading in that direction, but then everything just kind of halted really quickly. Schottenheimer got in for our first interview. The next day was a second interview. At that point, it was just a waiting game of when then if. So I think a lot of the ire here should be directed towards Jerry for the process. And when I say Jerry, I'm talking the whole Cowboys front office. Schottenheimer getting some strays, that's going to be part of it. He, at this point, he's been in the building. He understands. He probably knows that this is how it's going to go. But it's kind of what I said in an article that I wrote this morning, that Schottenheimer deserves a chance to show that what he can do, but Jerry's run out of chances, and that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, and I really like Brian. He's a good dude. We, Saad and I, we've talked about this a bunch, especially at his press conferences and things like that. He's very engaging. You can see how he can lead a room. When you watch him at practices, whether it's during the season or training camp, a lot of energy. Nobody's going to be more positive than John Fossil, so I'm not going to sit there and say that he was above that level, but Schottenheimer would be the next tier down in terms of if I'm talking about watching this coaching staff for the last 2-3 years, like who brings the most energy, who I could see like the players really rallying behind and things like that. I get all of that, but he also has to know at where he's at in his coaching career, the fact that other teams aren't asking to interview him for their head coaching position. He has to understand that there's going to come some fan, I don't know if I want to use the word backlash, but it's just not that exciting. It's just one of those things where it's like, I'm not trying to take shots at Brian Schottenheimer, but you look across the landscape and it's not like you were fending off other teams. Now, with that being said, he certainly could have just gone in there in that first interview, blown them away. It's even better than they thought it was going to be. And hey, this ends up being the perfect fit for this team. I totally get it. But that also makes a lot more sense if it's after the fact that you interviewed Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, at least even tried to reach out for him. Let a story come out where, hey, you know what? Ben said he was already set with the Bears. He appreciates you. Thank you, Jerry. I'm already set. I'm doing this. There's none of that. This is not an exhaustive process that happened here. And I cannot believe otherwise. And then the thing I keep going back to is anybody listening can be, I will not be sold on any type of, on Monday, there will be a press conference. I will not be sold on any Jerry Jones saying that he knew this was a possibility a long time ago. And the reason why I say that is because Jerry Jones has said many a times over the last 2 or 3 years, to the point where it made things uncomfortable, talking about how Dan Quinn could be the next head coach of the Cowboys. He could be the future head coach, talking about that stuff when it was types of things where you're like, hey, Mike McCarthy's still here. I don't know if you should really be saying that. We understand what you're saying, all that. That was never said about Brian Schottenheimer. We will not Monday morning quarterback this and act like this was always the plan. This was not always the plan. So I want to get that out there. So if any of that stuff is said Monday, no, it wasn't. I talked to plenty of people in the organization. We've been around Brian Schottenheimer the last 3 years. I know people like him, but this wasn't one of those things where forget months ago, weeks ago, you would have even said, well, if they move on from Mike, Schottenheimer maybe. He didn't even call the plays the last 2 years. He was a coaching staff analyst 3 years ago. So there's just a lot of things where if our podcast that we do is about the Jacksonville Jaguars, there's a lot of this stuff that's fine. But this is the Dallas Cowboys, and they're coming off of the season that they're coming off of. Their two biggest rivals are playing Sunday in the NFC Championship game, and the way that they conducted this entire process to come to this final decision on the head coach, again, it might work out. It might be great. I mean, there was a lot of questions about Dan Campbell when he took over the Lions, his introductory press conference, all that stuff, and it's been phenomenal. It's so far exceeded expectations. You can't even. There's not even a comp. But with that being said, as we sit here today, everybody is completely fair in questioning this. There's no come on, buy in and just be part of this and just back it. No. They have not done anything, not in the last at least 15 years, for you to give them the benefit of the doubt. And so while it could be a success, we have every right to be skeptical today.
And John, I saw you write in your Athletic article about, Jerry's often quoted as saying, you wouldn't believe the check I'd write. And in an era where there's no salary cap for coaches, it does beg the question, what's holding them back in that regard?
We just read that quote wrong, Kent. That's all it is. We would be shocked because the number would be so low. We would be shocked because he really wouldn't want to spend a lot of money. It's very clear. I mean, it's just very clear.
I don't know if he meant it that way. I've heard him say that before.
That's true. Okay. I get it, Kent. This is my fault. Everything I just said right there, that was 100% sarcasm. I was not being serious.
You're so good, John.
I was not being serious about that at all. But the actions show me that he would not be spending very much. It'd be one of those things like here, honestly, it'd be one of those things where it was like, hey, we're going to go around to all the owners, and they're all going to write down on a piece of paper how much money they would give to win a Super Bowl. And you fold up your paper, but your name's on it. And when they pulled all the names out of the hat and they read the Jerry Jones one, I think that people would be like, wow, that wasn't even top 10. And this is during a time where it's easy to make a comp because it's literally going on right now in baseball. There is no salary cap. And every time you refresh your phone, it feels like the Dodgers are signing another top player where you're just like, are they building like the 92 dream team in LA? Like, how would anybody even mess with this squad?
Yeah.
And when you see that, 10, 15, 20 years ago, you'd be like, man, if there wasn't a cap, that's what Jerry would be doing with the Cowboys. No, it wouldn't. And we've seen that. That absolutely would not be happening.
Jerry is a business genius. You know how quickly, if he wanted to sign a coach, if there was a coach he wanted and said, all right, here's my number, Jerry, and they didn't, quote unquote, didn't have the budget, how he could work out a deal with Under Armour for the amount that would cover that coach, you know? Like, there are other ways to go about this when you operate like they do. And they don't seem to be making that leap when it comes to getting the big fish at the coaching position, which comes to the question, is this the guy that will do what Jerry wants? Is this the guy that's going to push them forward? Is he going to take new leaps? How do you guys view that?
Well, I mean, first, I want to go back a little bit to what John was saying before, and because I think this is an important point to drive home. Sorry to go back on this a little bit, but I wanted to chime in on this. Was this whole thing about we saw this coming, or this was some premeditated plan. That's something that everybody should be on alert for, what that Jerry's going to say, and there's proof that this none of that is true, because Mike McCarthy had a struggling year and a contract year. If you thought Schottenheimer was the next guy, you could have fired Mike McCarthy in the middle of the season and given Schottenheimer a chance. And then the other thing, something John has mentioned before about, when we got into the coaching search, was in today's NFL, what the Dallas Cowboys and everything that they are, you normally hear leaks or candidates or something like that about this guy as a front runner. There was nothing about Schottenheimer before this week. And so it kind of all goes back to kind of what we've talked about in terms of, there was not really a plan in place. I don't think there was a plan in place when the season was in play. I don't think there was a plan in place after the season with McCarthy, or even after McCarthy was gone. So I think that is going to be something that Jerry might try to sell in Monday's press conference. And yeah, I just want to say, I think if Schottenheimer was their guy to going forward, there was plenty of chances over the last months and weeks for that to come to light, but it never did.
Yeah, and I think that they go with him because of the continuity with Dak, with the offense. You have a lot of money invested over there. And so when everything was probably weighed, that's probably why they leaned in that direction. And so don't get me wrong, like the final decision, I get it, hey, it's underwhelming. But I think just the whole process, it's hard for me to get past that to even get to the candidate. It just, the way that they went about it and how it just seems like they were just shooting from the hip and just kind of like, well, we'll figure this thing out. That stands out to me, even to the point of, the day that it's announced that Mike McCarthy and the Cowboys are parting ways, the first name that comes out is, Jerry was talking to Deion Sanders. Well, this hire just shows you that was all just to just stir some stuff up, that there was never any truth to that, because those are the two most opposite candidates you could possibly have. Also, by the way, if it really was Deion Sanders, this thing would be dragged out even further, and there would be a lot more smoke behind it. That was never real, So this idea that that was even a possibility, no, it wasn't. It was going to be whatever felt safest for Jerry, and this feels safe for Jerry. And hey, maybe it doesn't work out. It's a 4-year deal. Maybe in another year or two, they go in another direction if it's a disaster, whatever. Is interesting, though, too. 4 years matches up with what Dak's contract is, So we'll see. We'll see how all that goes. And yeah, Brian Schottenheimer deserves the benefit of the doubt. He deserves a chance to go into training camp. He deserves a chance to go into the draft. And obviously, the offense needs to be addressed in that draft, whether you talk about maybe offensive line, but certainly running back and possibly another wide receiver. Let him put his stamp on some things. Let's see what he can do there. But as we sit here today, there's plenty of time that we'll have to talk about that. But as we sit here today, it's hard for anybody to look at this and be really that geeked and excited about it. Also, Kent, you'll like this. This is just my own conspiracy thing, and there's no truth behind any of this. I haven't been told this by anybody. But, judging by how everything went down with Mike McCarthy and how, it was one of those things where Mike fondly talks about how that final conversations went down. I believe it was in the Cowboy Club with Jerry and Jerry Jr. and Steven. And then finally, Jerry was talking this long story and finally told Mike, you need to be the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. And they celebrated after, and they were all excited, and probably consumed several adult beverages. How funny would it be if this thing could have been done Wednesday night, but Jerry's like, no, let's push this on until Friday night, because then we can have everybody up in the Cowboys Club. We can celebrate it. It'll be a big party thing. And I imagine stories like that will come out. For it to happen Friday night like that, I imagine that Schottenheimer was with Jerry, probably told him then, and it was a big celebratory thing, as it should be. I mean, if you're Brian Schottenheimer, this is your first chance to become a head coach. You're in your 50s. You've been coaching the NFL for 25 years. Absolutely celebrate it. Be happy about it. But where the Cowboys organization is at right now, especially comparative to what we're seeing from Washington and Philadelphia, I just don't know how you can be super excited right now if you're a Cowboys fan.
I agree with you in a sense, but I also disagree with the fact that they didn't have a plan. Because I do think they had a plan. I just don't think that plan worked out. Their plan was to bring back Mike. What they weren't counting on was that not working out. They didn't have a backup plan. I think that should be maybe the case. Not that they didn't have a plan. They didn't have a backup plan. And they didn't do enough due diligence in those critical days and hours and weeks when every other team around the league was bringing people in. And, Mike Vrabel would have been high on my list. He was another guy that kind of left, went to New England kind of during that weird, awkward week when we didn't know if Mike was coming back or not officially.
I agree to a certain extent on that, Kent, but then you also have to remember the Cowboys criteria, which is something that you mentioned as well. Ben Johnson, for the money that he's going to be making, never fit the criteria, and Mike Vrabel, for probably, I'm assuming, what kind of control and how much control he would want, probably doesn't fit the criteria of what the Cowboys are looking for in a head coach anyways. I mean, I think they water it down themselves.
I'm glad you mentioned criteria, because I wanted to ask you guys, what happened to the criteria of been to a Super Bowl or Super Bowl winning head coach or head coaching experience? What happened to that with this?
I imagine we'll be told a lot of things about how fondly Jerry thought of Marty Schottenheimer and how he sees a lot of similarities with Brian.
I don't see that happening.
Tune in Monday.
Sarcasm. I'm doing it right back at you.
Yeah, tune in Monday. You'll see all about that. No, there's that, but then there's also just the fact of Jerry always is, he's just a salesman. So it's whatever he feels comfortable with at that time. So for Mike McCarthy, it was to say that, it was the Super Bowls. Obviously, he couldn't say that about Jason Garrett. So it was a different message at that time. So he doesn't really, there isn't like a definitive plan at all. I think there's a lot of kind of going all over the place and trying to figure things out as you go. And that's why you get the results you do, where there's some, Cowboys have had some really good seasons, but overall, they're not close to reaching what you would expect from an organization on the level as they are. And I think this hire is just another thing you can put in that basket.
How much do you think Jerry regrets Kellen Moore's and Dan Quinn's success this year elsewhere, kind of letting them go, their separate ways? And obviously Dan Quinn, it wasn't the best timing with the way the defense performed in the playoffs last year. But, I mean, at least I got the feeling watching the team when Dan Quinn was the interim coach there for a little bit, that this felt like the new era of this team, right? The energy and the direction, it felt like, okay, these guys have clearly buy into this guy, and this guy has experience. And then Dan Quinn goes off to Jerry's, probably least favorite franchise, or maybe not anymore, right? If you guys read the Dan Snyder piece that came out today, is quite good, and has a bunch of success. Maybe he regrets that a little bit. Doesn't want Shoddy to be the next Dan Quinn. Go somewhere else. Win. We already got the guy here. Scenario maybe.
I think those are two different cases. I will say that I'm very confident if Dan Quinn was available in this hiring cycle, that Dan Quinn would be the current head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. I don't feel that way about Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore could have it. They interviewed Kellen Moore. Obviously, that didn't move the needle. They were obviously more moved by Brian Schottenheimer than Kellen Moore. But the way that Jerry had talked the last few years about Dan, and I totally understand, like, I'm not hindsighting this thing at all, because you couldn't have made that move after that Packers loss. I don't care what anybody says. You can't do it then. But if, let's say, they moved on from Dan after that, and let's say Dan didn't get a head coaching job, but he went somewhere else to be the DC, like it was a one-year type thing, Let's say he goes to Philly instead of Vic Fangio. I think Dan Quinn is the coach of the Dallas Cowboys right now, because Jerry really did like Dan being the leader, the way he carried himself, the messaging and all that. And to a certain extent, I wonder if he sees a little bit of that in Brian too, where it's very relatable, which I think is important with these younger players and things like that. But the thing that's the difference is obviously Dan Quinn had already been a previous head coach in Atlanta. He'd taken a team to a Super Bowl, where with Brian, we don't know. I mean, there's just as many questions about Brian as any of these other offensive coordinator, defensive coordinators that are taking over. When you've never been a head coach before, there's a big jump there. There's going to be growing pains. There's going to be things that you're just not foreseeing that you think, even though you've been, assistant for 25 years, you just don't know until you're actually in that big chair. And so we'll see. But no, I think if Dan Quinn is a DC right now on another team, I think that they're holding out waiting for him, and he would have been the next Dallas Cowboys head coach.
Interesting. Love it. All right, let's get to some Discord questions. Link is in the description for the Discord. It's free to join. Talk to Cowboys fans everywhere, including us. The Dawn has a very simple question. What reason do we have to be optimistic?
That the best things that have happened to the Dallas Cowboys over the last 10 or 15 years have been things that you didn't expect, and in moments when you didn't expect them. You certainly didn't expect Dak Prescott to be the success he's been as a late fourth-round pick. You never expected them to have the success with Micah Parsons. When you go in that draft and you're thinking that, and they're thinking that they're taking a corner, and obviously getting Micah was a much better return on investment. You can make the argument he's as much of a reason for their success over the last 4 years as anyone. CeeDee Lamb falling to them, that was not the plan at that time going in the draft, but sometimes some good things fall into your lap. And then I also think about the 2014 and 2016 seasons. I don't think anybody in 14 thought they would have that year. Going into camp, Jerry talked about, he actually kind of tempered expectations, and that was one of the first times Jerry's ever done that. And they ended up having a phenomenal year. In 2016, you came off that 2015 season where it was just awful, 4 wins, and you're not expecting Zeke and Dak, these two rookies, to kind of basically do what Jane Daniels is doing this year with Washington. So when you haven't really expected it, that's when things have hit for them. And so maybe that's the thing with Schottenheimer. Maybe he ends up being a way better head coach than anybody thought he would be. And we look back on this and we go, wow, I don't know how that ended up working out, but it ended up being the perfect hire. And he ends up getting a second contract, and they have a lot of success. But as we sit here today, that's just something that's very hard to predict.
Yeah, I would say that there's also some uncertainty with Schottenheimer, which is not always, or I guess uncertainty is another word, but mystery. Like you don't know that he is a failure as a head coach or anything like that. So you have to give him a little bit of a chance. It's not like you turned around and just hired Gerard Mayo or something like that right after he failed for a year, and you're like, well, this has no chance. Now Schottenheimer has had his ups and downs as an OC. He's had some good moments, but he's had some troubling moments as well through his Jacksonville tenure, Seattle, all that stuff. But as a head coach, it's a blank slate. And so, and to be honest, I remember when Sirianni was hired in Philadelphia, there was a lot of negative reaction right off the top. He had an awkward press conference as well in his intro and everything like that. And it's worked out okay for the Eagles. So, there is something there in the mystery, whereas you don't know that it's going to be a failure.
Good point. Great point. Let's go to Zach. Who do you guys think will be on the staff? And I'll just throw this out there as a question too. If Witten's on the staff, how much of those questions are going to come up?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's certainly there's a lot of connecting the dots there. I mean, I don't think anybody should be surprised if Jason Witten is the tight ends coach of the Dallas Cowboys. I'm not saying it's a done deal or anything like that. I mean, it's not a guarantee. I'm just saying you shouldn't be surprised if that happens. I would say Lunda Wells, who had been the tight ends coach, I could see him being the offensive line coach. That one seems to make a lot of sense there. And then defensively, I think the obvious front runner is Matt Eberflus. He's a candidate that they're considering, that they think highly of. Obviously had been in the building before, but they still have to go through the process of interviewing candidates. So I think there's a good bet that he would be on the staff as the DC. Outside of that, I think anybody's guess is as good as mine right now, just because of the fact that we just really don't know, because of the fact that it's not like Schottenheimer is in that Shanahan tree where you just go, oh, well, then this is the next person that in the, like, Schottenheimer has coached for a lot of different teams, a lot of different coaches. Like, he could pull from a lot of different areas that we're not even thinking about right now. So, I mean, in terms of former players, though, Witten would be one. And then it would not surprise me if, like, DeMarco Murray ended up being like the running back coach or something like that. But yeah, those would probably be the ones.
That's a good.
Yeah. And also with like Eberflus being the potential DC as it seems, it's interesting because Eberflus and Schottenheimer have never crossed paths in the NFL, so that's kind of more of a Jerry thing, putting him in place. So I will be curious to see also how much autonomy Schottenheimer gets to assemble his staff, not just especially on the offensive side of the ball. And that's something that, I'm really intrigued about the Monday press conference, just to see how Schottenheimer also feels about the OC position and play calling, because this isn't a situation like Mike McCarthy where when he came, you knew that his preference was to call plays and to be the OC, but like he'll settle. We don't know what Schottenheimer's preference and like how strongly he feels about it. Is he okay hiring another play caller, offensive coordinator, or does he really want to do all of that himself in his first go around? So there's that. And then the other thing is that all the former players getting hired and stuff, if that happens, that's great. But I do think that there needs to be some experience on this staff too. And Matt Eberflus, I understand he was a head coach in Chicago. That didn't go well, clearly. But you look at the way Mike McCarthy kind of approached his staffs. The DC was always a former head coach type of thing. But even like offensive line coach like Joe Philbin or something like that, someone that has experience so that you can really focus on doing what your forte is. And so, I have a lot of curiosity with how Schottenheimer is going to assemble this thing.
And then one other thing I want to add about Schottenheimer too, for anybody that wants to use like the puppet term or whatever like that, just look in the mirror. You'd be a puppet too in this exact same situation. So be careful about throwing out stuff and taking shots at that, because every one of you out there would do the exact same thing. 25 years assistant in the NFL, you get a chance to be a head coach. I don't care what organization it is. And I don't even care if you even care about the organization is. I don't care about any of that. Just look at the difference in what your paycheck would be. Like if you're saying all this stuff and like being critical of him about taking this job and all that, I mean, you're just basically showing like you don't need to say more. You're just clueless. That's just what you are. There's nobody that's turning this down in his situation. Nobody. There's nobody that's turning this down.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. Bones went to the Tennessee Titans, special teams coordinator, and Al Harris went to the Bears to join Ben Johnson's staff. So we'll have to keep an eye out on kind of what they do there. And man, this staff is going to be really an interesting thing to look at. And I'm with you, Saad. I'm wondering about the OC and kind of their philosophy there, and how risky they're gonna be in changing things up.
I'm interested how Brian handles some moments down the line where Jerry says some things that don't really help him out as a coach, because everything we've seen from Brian is he'll knock that out of the park. Like, he'll handle it as well as anybody. Like, it won't bother him, or at least he won't show it, in any press conferences or anything like that. So I do think that dynamic will be fine, but I don't see it being the dynamic that I know a lot of fans want, where you have the head coach that is willing to push back on Jerry, which is obviously like when you talk about a Bill Parcells, or a lot of people were hoping if it was Deion Sanders, that would be a case. I don't see Brian doing that. I don't see him arguing with, well, Jerry said this morning on the radio this, ... Like, he's not gonna get in some war of words or anything like that. But if he does, I'm here for it.
I got faith in Flus. Flus is my second guy on my list other than Saleh. Saleh would be like my dream scenario at DC, but Flus is right there. So I think that's nice. That's nice. That's what you want to see.
The name that's out there that intrigues me the most is Dennis Allen. Just because, he didn't have success as the Saints head coach or the Raiders head coach, but he's a really good defensive coordinator. And then the flip side of that is too, if he has a lot of success, you really don't have to worry about some other team grabbing him, because he's already been a head coach twice. I guess with Eberflus, you don't have to worry about that either, which is how poorly things ended in Chicago. So if the guy does have a lot of success, it's not like it's one of those things where you got to worry constantly about other teams trying to come after them. So I did like Matt Eberflus a lot when he was in Dallas, covering him as the linebackers coach, and then he got promoted to that defensive passing game coordinator. Really good dude, just like Schottenheimer is. So, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. But with that being said, coming off of the way things ended in Chicago, of course, if he's the pick, people are going to have skepticism because of how he was as a head coach.
Well, let's wrap it up here. We got a big press conference on Monday. Look for John and Saad to be front and center, probably on TV all around the country, asking all the tough questions.
Can I share a quick story for you?
Oh, please.
So when this news is breaking, I'm at a Shields looking at winter gloves because I had purchased a ticket to the AFC Championship game thinking that there's no way they'll do a press conference on Monday, the way they've been dragging this thing on next Friday at the earliest. So needless to say, canceled my hotel, put my ticket up for resale, didn't buy any new winter gloves. So won't be making that trip to Arrowhead. I was going to drive because obviously it's last minute, it's about a 7-hour drive, whatever. So won't be doing that. Now, this is on the heels of I had already purchased tickets for the Lions NFC Championship game, and obviously that didn't happen. So I have purchased now tickets to the NFC Championship game and the AFC Championship game, and I will not be at either of them.
I forgot. I forgot when you were talking the other day about the AFC Championship. I forgot about the Lions scenario too. Damn. Yeah, you're probably the only person in America that can say that.
That is rough. Well, hopefully the press conference is worth it. Hopefully it's not a letdown, and you at least get a little bit of juice out of that. I'm sure it'll be interesting. We'll be here to cover it all with KT on the One Star Cowboys podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to this feed. Share it with your friends, Cowboys fans. We're all in this together, folks. It's going to be a ride. So buckle up and join us for the rest of this offseason and into next season. For John and Saad, I'm Kent. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
I don't have time to have a bad time. It ain't on my schedule.